Good afternoon. Hello, hello. It's nice
Hi, Mark. Hi.
having a face to place with names. Hello, Michael.
Welcome to all to this Eastern Art Gallery's Intersection of Art and Science Forum. And I just want to say this is just one of several opportunities we've had with this exhibition, which is great, to really delight in the discussion of how art helps us connect to scientific subjects by, as you say, igniting a sense of wonder. And by increasing our ability to understand nature's mechanisms, and that's what our geneticist, Dr. Raham, was talking about more recently. And then this artwork, your artwork, propels us to keep trying to understand how to preserve nature for future generations. For me, nature has always been a work of art that I needed to figure out. And I had to keep reminding myself I'm not always out there in the beautiful nature. So I need your pictures, your work, to keep reminding me of why I do what I do as an ecologist. So your artwork tells a story that lives forever. And you made a point in saying in the catalog notes that you pick a focal point, you use specific colors to try to guide people and of the viewers in order to channel your vision of what you're trying to say or portray about nature. So you picked a technique. Everybody has a different technique that sparks that reaction in the viewer. And that reaction showcases something important about this living thing that keeps people reflecting and thinking about it. And that's the unique component of your work that none of us can do with just words. We really need to keep looking at the painting, the picture, the animation, the visual component is essential. So you need, in your work, you've picked a precise way of telling your story. But it isn't just the precision that makes it so important, it's the creativity and the evolution of that creativity. I've talked to our art students and our art professors, and they say, well, I started with this, and then I moved into that, and then I picked this shade, and that wasn't good, and I painted over that, and I rearranged it. And for some of your work, you have to there is no, too much evolution is not doable. So you have to plan everything way in advance and not mess it up too much along the way if you're going to get to the finished product. And that kind of planning requires a technique, a way of thinking that's very much in line with our liberal arts education, the critical thinking approach. If I do this, it's not going to give me that. So how do we get our students to think that way? That's what I'm hoping that we can discuss today. And then certainly, besides being an expert at precision, you're an expert at integration, because you're not going to paint something that nobody will recognize what kind of scientific, subject that was. So you have to make it interesting and spark it, a thought in the person viewing it and actually be accurate. That's pretty hard. So I love the way you say things like, you talk about how you strive to connect science with sentimentality. Because science by itself, no scientist ever, stayed in the lab till, midnight because they just want to find out the answer to a problem. They're really, there was a passion connected to that was unrelated to the hours of work there. And you talk about precision to fabricated seduction. I love that, because you could write a whole short story on that and that phrase, fabricating a seduction using your artwork. And if we were really great storytellers like your, artists, the world would be a lot easier to navigate. So given that, how your goal being to, as you say, inspire synergy across science, fine arts, and humanities, well, that's our goal too, as a liberal arts education university. So we have to learn how to do that better. And I'm hoping that, you can help us do that. And you know who you are better than I do. So if those of you who are artists today, if you could introduce yourself one by one. I'll start with Marco Glass, which is on top here for my screen. So that way, just say who you are, say.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Say something about yourself. Yeah.
My name is Margot Glass, and I was born and raised in New York City. I currently live in Western Massachusetts, and I'm an artist. I teach art and I make art, and I'm very honored to be in the company of all the artists in this show. I really enjoyed reading the catalog because it seems like everyone is coming at this from a slightly different angle. One trait that I respect that comes into play with what I do is the sort of illusion of precision and accuracy, and how artists can kind of play with that fiction sometimes in the service of communicating information about the plants or the phenomena they're trying to capture, and how this precision can be a means to draw someone in and get their attention and kind of get them to listen, but also sort of twist the facts a little in order to engineer the artwork you're making to convey all the beauty or mystery of the subject. I mostly draw weeds and wildflowers, kind of undervalued plants, because I just want to highlight the beauty of these kind of sometimes considered to be undesirable plants. And I work in metal leaf and metal point and graphite and metallic inks. I like to play with the tradition of the decorative arts and how nature has been used in that context, and sort of playing off of that and using, instead of these idealized plants, these more humble, less recognized plants that kind of crop up in the margins. And there are a lot of artists here, so I don't want to talk too much about myself, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I have to say, this reminds me of being at my mother was a music teacher, and all the artists came to the house for parties. And I was, very young, and this is in Cuba. And boy, once they got talking, you couldn't stop. And it was just like, it was the story everything was a story. So it's beautiful to listen to. So Gary, you're next on my screen. You've got your picture in your background.
Okay, can you see me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Gary Raham. I'm really pleased to be part of this exhibit. It's a lot of fun. Actually, the slogan of the business that I started many years ago, Biostration, is kind of the place where science and education and art synergize. For a long time, I've wanted to be able to combine my interests in science and art. And it's taken me a long time to sort of do it. And I've taken kind of a circuitous route to get there. But I enjoy both illustrating as well as writing. And I've learned over the years that I can often integrate illustrations with articles and books that I write in order to sort of jumpstart people's imaginations, I think, and explain science in a way that makes it a little bit less cumbersome for people who may not be as familiar with it.
And it's definitely true that if we didn't have a picture of the coronavirus, which the red is just the staining somebody did in that one picture, Or it could have been a scientific illustrator. Nobody would recognize. But I don't know if you ever noticed, but the coronavirus looks a lot like ragweed pollen. So,
Yeah.
and it's those hooks that end up making us sick by clogging up our air, pockets in our lungs. So, but somebody needed to point that out. So it's very important to see that depiction, even if it's made in what we see on TV, it's made to look like more beautiful than what it really may be in real life. So,
Well, and I think it helps to take an unusual perspective on something which is normally invisible. That's kind of what I tried to do in the slime mold illustration that's in the show, kind of show this organism from a perspective that you wouldn't normally see it, and try to ignite somebody's sense of curiosity about it.
I know, and it's one of the things in the bio textbook that doesn't, get looked at enough, unless you happen to be into that field of discipline. So perfect. So Mark, I have you next in my screen.
Let me unmute myself.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Lefkowitz. I'm a certified medical illustrator. I went to Pratt Institute and then Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where I got my master's in medical and biological illustration. And I look at myself primarily as a storyteller, at least in the realm of medical illustration, because I also do a lot of fine art work as well, very realistic landscapes digitally. And I've also gotten into oil painting recently, which I really enjoy doing still lifes. So as a storyteller and as a medical illustrator, what I do is I completely immerse myself in the subject matter. I read everything I can about it, and I let the ideas, the science percolate, and I get bogged down in the tiniest of details and the large overview. And once things begin to percolate, I will create thumbnail sketches, and I'll do a whole variety. And it's generally the first or the second one that I've created that I generally go back to. And what I really enjoy doing, like many of you, is to show an image or a concept from a very unique perspective. And I love doing, as the three pieces that I have in the show, I love really doing cross sections of things. And by doing that, you're kind of showing as many aspects as possible in sort of a 3D way of what it is you're trying to produce. And I try to use color and design composition, value, all of those elements to create something that is going to be very, very dramatic, but it's going to tell the story really accurately. So do the things that I depict look exactly that way if you were to take photomicrographs? No, I remove a lot of the little nubbiness and things that don't look quite, realistic, but I try to make proportions of things and the general shapes of things and understanding how they work as realistic as possible, as three-dimensional as possible. And I try to create things that are really visually appealing so that even if you didn't know what was going on, you would find it to be, interesting to look at, but also really tell a story. So the three images of thrombopoiesis, which is how platelets are produced from stem cells within the bone marrow. So it's sort of like a conglomerate image. The other one is fertilization. So a sperm cell that is sort of integrating itself into the outer layer of an oocyte and the breaking apart of the head layer of the sperm cell with a background of the fallopian tube. And then the other one is chylomicrons, which is basically when food is digested in the small intestine, you have these little fatty droplets called chylomicrons that are created that go between the cells and then go into the lymphatics and are part of the whole digestive process. So those are the three. And I probably talked enough. I'm sorry.
It is amazing because you're looking at the big picture and you're looking at details at the same time. That kind of thinking is hard to generate in our students, and that's where what I say. I just love to hear you talk about that, because you're creating the mind that we want to create, but you do it with a picture. And it's very complicated. And I'm not going to learn how to do it exactly all today, but hopefully we'll learn a little bit of how to do it. So thank you. Patricia, you're next on my screen.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you for, having all of us. This is great. So my background, I actually live in Southeastern Mass, so I'm closer to the Cape than Boston. And my background is I have a degree in biology from Bridgewater State, now University. And I have a certificate in natural science illustration from RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. I'm also part of the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, the New England chapter. So if anybody's interested in that, we are, we meet regularly, obviously on Zoom now, and then the National Guild too. So I primarily focus on anything to do, as you said, you're an ecologist. So I'm also the full-time conservation agent for the town that I live in. So I do wetlands protection, all the regulatory stuff, and I also do land protection. So my whole life has just focused on ecology and in the environment. And yeah, I like to get people excited about what's out there. I also sometimes have children. I've actually taught from, very young people to people in assisted living homes, art, integrating kind of art and science together. And yeah, it's just trying to get the message out that these things are important. And I think, what would help your students, and obviously in this time of COVID, is usually allowed, getting them outside to do some of their studies. In different settings, and getting them to notice and getting them to just kind of be still and be in the moment and really observe. And that's what I like about how you have the intersection between science and art, is the observation piece. And I think that's very important for both art and science. So
I appreciate that. And I actually, a very good, close collaborator of mine in ecology began as an artist at the high school in performing arts and visual arts in New York. She started with ceramics and then worked into illustration of insects. And then she went to work for the Park Service for many years and was doing illustration of all the insects and pollinators in various national parks. And then she decided she wanted to become a full ecologist, so to speak, although she was already an ecologist for 20 years and went and got her PhD in ecology. So people start out by noticing first, and then from there, learn more about how to study what they're actually seeing. But first you have to see it. And to get people to see it is a really complicated thing in today's world, where we don't even go outside and spend time doing that. So I appreciate it. So I have Francis, is that you're next to Patricia in my screen? Unmute.
Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. I grew up in England, and I like to wander in the fields and the woods, and my father was always interested in natural history, etc. So I started out with that, and through college went with geography, botany, zoology. But then I kind of stayed home with kids for a long time, went back and did some graphic design because my husband was not that thing on being doing full fine arts all the time. But then I became an interpretive naturalist with a park system. And the whole thing kind of came together. When we moved to Rhode Island, I went to the certificate program in RISD for natural science illustrators and part of the guild, just as Patricia Cassady said. But I do a lot of nature journaling classes and things like that, as well as botanical art classes. And in my work, I vary between precision and more loose things. Mm-hmm. But my main goal is to help people to look and understand. And as I said, looking, seeing, noticing, wondering, questioning with the nature journal. I mean, why is there a hole in that leaf? You know, who could have made that hole? That sort of thing, I think, brings people in to see closer, look closer, and then they start to care. You've got in wildness is the preservation of the world, in looking and in caring, in understanding. And the pieces I put in, they're varied because one is looking through a microscope, and so something is now big. The beetle is big, where it was, you know, tiny under a microscope. But another one was the things that grow locally, plants that people often don't notice. They're walking with their earbuds on, whatever.
Yes.
They don't really see. And my goal is to help people to see. And at times it's to see very specifically, you know, what's there. Other times it's to see more emotionally. I did the one with I think it was milkweed and black swallowwort. One is an invasive, the black swallowwort, and it twines up the milkweed and overcomes it, but it's also a sink for monarch butterfly eggs, in that larvae die if they're on the black swallowwort, same family, and to sort of explain some of these interactions. I've done some signage for people, you know, so they see them on a walk about a vernal pool or whatever, trying to bring, as somebody else said, the unseen to be seen, to just bring a greater understanding. And there are times when it needs to be very precise, because it could be you're in, you know, a different species if you make a mistake. But other times it doesn't have to be quite so precise in its execution, but it does in its message, if you like. I once did a program, a journaling one, that says, don't just do something, sit there. A reverse of the don't sit there, just do something. Because when you sit quietly and you watch and you see things and you hear things, and it allows you to absorb it. And I think that that's what people need. I think I sort of brought together a lot of my different interests and backgrounds. Geography brings a lot of different aspects of the world together. And I think art can do that too. And the two are synergistic in that way. So making notes, questioning, wondering, I think that's what a lot of it's about. I'm not sure we take the time to question very often, you know, and wonder. So,
And I have to say, that's how I had a great PhD advisor who's still, you know, very much in touch with me. And the first class that she taught us as a grad student was to take us outside to an agricultural field and just say, so make a list of Daddy why questions. That's what she called. And we were just to wander around and come up with questions that came up in our head as we looked at this broad field, abandoned field, agricultural field in Michigan. And so it was exactly that. Now, I wish you people, this was not COVID time and you people could actually be here, because you would have gotten a tour. We have a great arboretum at Eastern that has 19 acres with the rolling, you know, stream, and there are rocks you can sit by the stream and watch things, and then a wonderful pond that I've studied for many years as a professor here with my students. And at different times of the year, very different thing. The most wonderful thing about it is November, early November, you have a whole row of witch hazel bushes in bloom, where everything else is sort of dying out. But then they come into bloom and they're all along the stream. And so you have these visuals of you know, different times of year visuals. Right now it's the skunk cabbage that would be most visible. But if you get to graduation time, the lady slippers are out. So all these things keep happening, and you know, you never get bored. That's the one thing about the one thing that I cannot do, I can visualize things, but I cannot draw or paint anything.
yes, you can.
I'm a good musician. That was the other side of the talent. My father could draw, and my brother could draw. Nothing, but they couldn't play the piano and I could. So, you know, they split it up that way. I don't
What
know.
you put your interest into. What you put the time into.
Yes, it is. And you have to get taught. It doesn't just happen, you
No.
know, right?
It's time, experience. Yeah.
Yes.
When we were talking about, just a little add on that,
Yes.
with especially with kids and that, if you take an object and you pass it around, they have to make a comment about it, something they see, something they feel, and keep going and going and going, and you get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, because they have to come up with something new. And I think that is one way of really getting people into something.
It is. It is. So next I've got Anna in front of me, Lindemann.
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with such a fine, creative bunch. It's really a treat to spend time this afternoon. I'm Anna. I call myself an Evo Devo artist. And by that, I mean I bring together a bunch of different artistic disciplines to explore evolutionary and developmental biology, shortened term Evo Devo. So I'm particularly interested in kind of biological processes that unfold over time, and often at time scales that are hard to see. So I completely relate to what others have been saying about the need for close observation and the way that we can leverage our skills as scientists or artists or hybrid people to discover the invisible or appreciate the invisible, I guess save the invisible at some point. And I'm interested in these things that might happen in a way that is too small or over millions of years, and we're not going to really understand them unless we use other tools to interpret them. So the piece that's in the exhibition is a piece called Ant Sisters. It's about the evolution of eusociality, so complex social life in ants over millions of years, 450 million years. And it kind of tells a fable about this origin of social life happening with just two little ants at first, sharing a nest site, and then eventually you get ant castes, so division of labor. So I'm really interested in kind of two ways of looking at art and science combinations. One, thinking about art being kind of in service to science, being a tool to help explain phenomena that are very difficult to explain unless you use visual media or other means. And also thinking about how science can be in service to art. You can do new creative things that get people thinking and are in fictional universes if you use science as a departure point. So I'm kind of interested in both of those possibilities. And I teach just down the road from ECSU at University of Connecticut, and I teach in the Department of Digital Media and Design, and have started a number of courses there that are about art-science crossover, including animating science and a scientific visualization course. And I'm really excited about this exhibit being something that can be a resource that lives on for teaching.
It is, and keep in mind that we have one of our biology professors got his PhD at UConn. He's our botanist, and they teach the intro bioorganismal bio course. And I think that'd be great to at some point have a joint project where the art students developing ways of telling the story to the intro bio students, and that would blow their minds, because everybody goes, well, what's in the textbook? What, and the textbook is not life. So this is great. Thank you. So I have Ellen over here. Unmute. There we go.
Oh,
Yes.
I should be unmuted now.
Good. Yes.
Okay, I live in New York City. I am an artist and writer. I want to start by thanking Yulia for her expert guidance throughout, and also the way she vividly researched everything. She was incredibly thorough. And thanks also to Mark for realizing the AR, the augmented reality component of my work. Well, I have been involved in art science discussions, activities, events for decades now, and I've come at it in several different ways. Most recently, I'm going to hold this up to you. You will see that I just received
Yes.
a book that's published by Bloomsbury Press, and it's about the influence of a 1917 tome on communities of artists, designers, architects. The book that really started this was 1917 Darcy Wentworth Thompson's book on growth and form. And
Wow.
we have a total of 14 chapters showing these influences, which range all across these disciplines. And maybe the most surprising part of it is not that he was so influential in the arts because of people like Buckminster Fuller and others who were totally taken with him, but the fact is that it's becoming relevant now to developments in evolution, the extended evolutionary synthesis, and new ideas about epigenetics. So I have 3 physical works in the gallery, plus 2 animations, which get triggered by the images that are within them. Now, the quote illustrations, the images that are doing this triggering are patent inventions. And I, for the most part, I started doing this soon after I had a commission 2 months before the Challenger disaster for NASA to document some aspect of the space shuttle launch. And of course, like everybody else who happened to be watching, I was totally devastated by the Challenger and started to look into the various ways technology can go wrong. And so for me, the patents really have become a way to critique maybe the unexpected, unanticipated consequences of technology that certainly, or the things that get overlooked. And in almost every work, and these 3 that you have in the gallery are no exception, one patent has to do with Chakrabarty's patenting of life forms. Basically, bacteria were genetically engineered to swallow oil, to eat oil, used during the Valdez Exxon spill, and it did not work. Another patent is the most recent, has to do with mining an asteroid, which is where we're now looking to exploit and excavate minerals outside our solar system, since we're in the process of ruining our own planet. And then the third has to do with evolution and the terminator gene, so-called. It was proposed and developed by the and the idea of it was that the point of their doing this was to make it impossible for farmers to get seeds from anyone else but Monsanto, with the result that was that you were limiting the diversity. So the aspect of nature that has concerned me fairly consistently is our efforts to control it and the unintended consequences. I'll say one other thing is that I went back to school at my young age and I got a PhD really only 6 years ago. And I did it to study the neuroscience of attention, because it seemed to me that the important subject today is intention, and the internet is almost a living proof of this. What manipulates your attention and what you focus on determines what your behavior will be, where your emphasis will be. And I would say in terms of students, make them aware of how their attention is being deployed, and assign more tasks which require for their solution going across a broad range of fields. So thank you. I know that.
No, this, it reminds, we just developed a new concentration in cognitive neuroscience in our psychology major, and everything that they wrote was about that. I felt like we were talking, I was going through my classes. I took classes with two people who were very well known in evolution. One was in plant evolution, Ledyard Stebbins, who was from New England, and the other was Stephen Jay Gould. And it was sort of like deja vu listening to you talk about, but from the artist's point of view as well, which is what we're trying to do here today. So I appreciate it. Now we have Rob, and Rob Wood, okay, is the next person I have on the screen.
Okay,
Thank you.
am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Yes, I think I started out, well, I've always been interested in science. I grew up in Johnson City, Tennessee. That's where I was born. So I still have a little bit of an accent. But anyway, I've always liked science. And so when it came time to do my master's, I decided to do it on art in the service of science. So I illustrated a bunch of the idea of the life cycle of stars. Excuse me. So from that point, I came up to the Washington, D.C. area and got a job with a design company just as a general illustrator. But so from that point, I guess my work's a little different because I do all kinds of illustration, but my main interest was scientific illustration. So it led to all kinds of interesting things. One of the first jobs I got was to illustrate a book by Carl Sagan. And so it was the one on nuclear winter that they had a big conference in Washington and they needed an illustrator, and somehow we'd been working with a PR firm and they suggested that I do it. So that was a big thrill, and it was a big breakthrough in science with the idea that a nuclear explosion around the earth, would throw us into a nuclear winter. So they asked me to illustrate what that would look like. So it was kind of challenging, but it was also fun. But yeah, the biggest thrill about what I do is I've met so many amazing people that, are tops in their field. I also got to do a book for National Geographic with that Robert Ballard wrote, and he discovered the Titanic, and it was like thrilling to have him sit down and look at my sketches. So that was great too. And then later on, I did a book with Neil deGrasse Tyson that he co-wrote, but he was the person that we worked with. And I say we because I have a studio that there are several artists, we all work together. And that sort of led to all kinds of strange jobs that come in, or, interesting things. So yeah, because I had done a whole lot of work with Time Life on their Universe series. And when Neil, I think the editor that I worked with at Time Life, they were asked to come in and do the book for the Rose Science Center that Neil deGrasse Tyson, where he works. So since I'd done illustrations for that, they called me up in my studio and we got to work on that. And it was thrilling because actually got to have lunch with him and have Neil deGrasse Tyson talk to you about the quantum mechanics and stuff. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's talking to me about quantum mechanics. So I was like thrilled to death. So anyway, so it's led to all kinds of things. And I don't do just scientific illustration, but I still do a lot of work for the National Park Service. And the piece behind me is from Bryce Canyon, showing how prairie dogs live.
Mhm.
And also I somehow got to do a book actually did 5 books for Stephen King. And one, they were looking for an artist to do something different. And so they wanted, the book was called 4 Past Midnight. So since I'd done a lot of space art, I had a clock in space, and they liked that a lot. So that's kind of bizarre that my interest in science led to a Stephen King cover, basically. So, but my advice is to, when you look at something or a job comes in, for students, just try to be unique and different, and try to observe it in a different way. And other people today have said the same things. Try to, look at a different way, take a different angle, think of the lighting, and just something that will make it unique to you. Because just like in all arts, there's a million people out there that can do what you do, but if you can do it differently, then you'll be ahead of those other people. And just to talk quickly about the piece I've got, or the 2 pieces I have, one was exciting because it was Warreo Comico, which is the place where Captain John Smith met Pocahontas and worked with Powhatan. And they just discovered the location several years ago, and they asked me to come down to the site, and I walked around with the archaeologist who found the place, who discovered it, and he described it and told me about where Powhatan's where his longhouse was. And so I got to see that, or I got to see the place, and they explained how they were able to figure out the layout of the longhouse by the burnt places in the ground where the poles were. So that was really interesting. So I tried to recreate something very accurate as possible. And over the years, I start out, I do watercolors and acrylic, but lately I've been doing things digitally, where I'll create the scene in a 3D program, and then bring it to life and add trees and everything. So that's kind of exciting. And then the other one was for Kids Discover, just another our place in the galaxy. And we've done a whole lot of work for Kids Discover over the years. And Carol Schwartz, she was here earlier, but she's worked with me also. So anyway, that's pretty much it.
It reminds me of we have a lot of connections. I know a lot of the people who work with the prairie dogs, and I also know we were very lucky at Eastern to have Neil deGrasse Tyson for one of our commencements ceremonies a few years back, and we gave him an honorary degree. It's the cheap way. He's very expensive as a speaker, but you can get him for free if you give him a degree. So, and he came over and gave a wonderful, acceptance speech, which we really appreciated. So you'll have to, what reminds me about you as artists is that you take advantage of whatever opportunity comes your way. It may be, an ingrained reaction to making sure you have a living, but actually it's the same thing that pops. You can capture things that other people are not noticing or paying attention to, and you make something out of them. And that's what good ecologists do too. We notice things that other people haven't noticed, except we can't actually, even with a photograph, you really don't get the same feel that you get by looking at your artwork. So That's why we need you, for sure. And so I'm going to go on to Wendy, who's next to you on my screen. Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy, and
Mhm.
I am a freelance medical illustrator, same as Mark. And I know I have a lot of different connections in here. I'm also the president of the New England chapter of the GNSI. I have my biology degree from Bridgewater State College, which is now the Bridgewater State University. And I got my Master of Fine Arts in Medical Illustration from Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. I have drawn stuff since I could hold something in my hand. And it was married with this insane obsession with all things science. And I used to drive my parents crazy with the question, why? And so it kind of just came as natural to get into medical illustration. I don't necessarily just do medical illustration. I also do a lot of scientific work, and I've specialized out into doing veterinary work as well. Two of the pieces I have in the show are on basically the hemodynamic system of the equine hoof. That's very complicated. And I think that's kind of, it plays off of, that's one of the things that I like doing. I like making the complicated easy to understand, so that someone can learn about it. A lot of my clients are researchers or surgeons, and so they've got a very high level of understanding, and they're trying to explain something new. And often it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of detail, and I guess my job is to kind of simplify it, clarify it, and put it in a format so that someone can visually learn it instead of having to read a text. Some of the journal articles that I've done illustrations for, I read the article and I read about a paragraph. Okay, what did I just read? And go back and read it again. And so that kind of made it really clear that that's a very unique skill set that we can bring to it, is that we can make these very complicated things much more simple and much clearer. The third piece that I have in the show is actually a really interesting piece. It was for a neuroscience researcher at MIT. It's printed out in a very large format for the gallery show. It was never intended to be quite that big, so it was a challenge to increase the size and print it out. That one's a very different take, because in some ways it's very specific type of neurons, the pyramidal neurons in the brain that they're studying, but we simplified them very, very much. So they're more graphical, and then abstracted them to try and hide a figure in there. So you're trying to illustrate social isolation with neurons, because her article was studying the effects of social isolation on brain chemistry. So it was an interesting challenge, but I think that's why I enjoy doing what I'm doing. And I think for a lot of the students that are getting into art, kind of to echo what everybody else has said, is to really be present, to slow down, to really be observant, but to also really push those traditional skills of observation and perspective and form and light. Because if you don't have a general understanding of how to do that with your hand, the computer isn't going to help you do it either. The computer's just a tool, and I know quite a number of people that it's like they can't draw unless they're working on a computer. And I think that can handicap people in certain instances. So they really need to be able to have the fundamentals well in hand in order to just use the computer as the tool that it is, basically. And I think that's all I got.
That's wonderful. I'm thinking when you're talking about this, because I'm writing a book about developing the ecological mindset. And the first thing we have to do is to get people to read the landscape. But we all read the landscape differently, and we focus on different things. So if you want different cultures to relate to the same landscape for the study of it, you have to connect to whatever the cultural background is and what are they bringing to the table that connects them to that. And that focus is the bridge that you create in your pictures is the focus that you provide so that people can hone into the right, this is where we want you to start looking. And that's again, it's a hard thing to do with words, and you all do it so much better with art. So thank God. So we go on to Michael and Susan, who are in the middle of my screen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Perfectly.
I'm Susan Gamble, and we're a team, and we share differing backgrounds. I have a degree in fine art and a PhD in history and philosophy of science. And we're joining you this evening here from lockdown England. And the piece we made with a hologram was in the first lockdown in New York City. We made a piece of some pills and some containers on our bathroom floor. Now, everything about holography would say the best results would come from working in a really big physics lab with the best lasers and equipment. So we were amazed to make this small piece in our bathroom. We were even more amazed to send it over to Connecticut with a precise set of installation instructions. Maybe the precision installation instructions should have been exhibited as well. The thing about holography is it's a kind of Cold War technology, and it's a hybrid in itself, partly a theory by Denis Gabor and a technology by some American engineers. And so for artists working in it, we're very much self-taught. We've had to explore the medium ourselves, and that has been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, so Susan and I have these different backgrounds, but we work in holography and photography. And if you haven't seen the hologram in the show because of COVID, it's an image that was recorded on the floor of our bathroom. So there's like the honeycomb tiles, but the glass plate, it's a photographic plate. It's resting on pills. And then the pill containers were sitting on top of the photographic plate, and they cast a shadow, which is very sharp. I just thought that maybe would help people understand what that piece was. So when Susan and I started working together, one of the first projects that we did together was as artists in residence at an astronomical observatory. It was actually the Royal Greenwich Observatory, the oldest scientific institution in the United Kingdom. And it was closed about 10 years ago, which is kind of sad because it was 2 or 3 centuries old. We were working in what at that time was a kind of tradition of artists in residence in England, where it wasn't so much that you were going to be of service to your host, but you were going to do your own thing in a different environment, somebody else's environment, and somehow that would give it a flavor or a context. So for us, holography is a photographic process. It reproduces things. When it came to looking at astronomy and what they were doing, we can't make a hologram of the universe, so we can't make a hologram of a star. Some people might have thought we were going to make models, and then make a hologram of them, but then that was kind of boring.
Mhm.
And we just found ourselves working on a completely parallel track where we went into history and we found something really fundamental to both what we were doing, which was lasers and holography, and what the astronomer was doing, which was the history of optics. And we were very lucky that the character of of Isaac Newton, he did work in both optics and astronomy. So we worked with some texts of his. We worked with some of his optical experiments, and we turned his optical experiments with light and prisms into things that might at first look abstract, and they're very colorful. They're holograms. They're kind of three-dimensional fields of light, kind of abstract, but in fact not abstract, because they are fairly precise reproductions of Isaac Newton's experiments. It's just that we've given them such a strange context that they become, they can have another reading, but they can have a reading as contemporary art or abstract art. But at the same time, if you look at them a different way, they could be a kind of illustration of a Newtonian experiment.
And that's amazing, because that's exactly what we would want to happen in your basic lesson. You know, here's the experiment, but nobody knows how that happens. And you just sort of depict it in some kind of three-dimensional way. And having grown up with Star Trek as a girl and as a teenage girl, let me just say, you know, the word hologram just evokes wonders. So we appreciate it very much that you're using history and new technology and blending it together to look at the world in a different way. And I was lucky to actually see the exhibit because I happened to be on campus, you know, so with a mask on. So thank you. So Carol, we've got you here, Carol Schwartz.
There I am. Good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here today and talk with everybody. It's been so nice to hear what everyone has to say. I teach at Eastern Connecticut State University illustration. Right now I'm teaching a class in scientific illustration. So this exhibition couldn't have come at a better time. It's just been great for my students to see all the beautiful work. My work has been in the field of children's books, nonfiction, science and nature. So I've illustrated 60 books, and I'm really very happy that I've been able to bring science and nature to children. I've enjoyed it a lot. I also have been an artist in residence at the Shoals Marine Laboratory on the Isle of Shoals off the coast of Maine, and being there and surrounded by marine biologists and working with marine biologist students on seeing and observing has really been both fun and eye-opening for me to see how much people don't see when they're looking at things, and to help them to understand how to observe and take in information and then put it back down on paper in a way that makes sense.
It's amazing what our students, you know, I'm sure that, you know, they will get something that we haven't even thought about by looking at the exhibit, but this exhibit brings so many different kinds of techniques into one place. And it's like the perfect show to look at comparisons and similarities for discussing this issue and for improving science education in general, because that's what's missing from science education, the wonder of the art world. So I appreciate it. Now, I think Aga is next.
Yeah. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aga Husseinov. I grew up in former Soviet Union in city of Baku on Caspian Sea. where I graduated from college and in sculpture department. Then I moved to Moscow, where I graduated. I did MFA in sculpture in Academy of Fine Arts, and I moved to New York in 1991. So I'm sculptor by training, but I try to push forward the established traditions of sculpture. And so I ended up in working in mixed media. And one of the medias I'm working, it's a constructed photography, which based on sculptures, which I have in the studio. It's old sculptures, it's broken pieces, it's some structures, which I turn to constructed photography. Then I deconstruct them. I create collages out of them. So 3 pieces which I have in this show are made in this technique. And those pieces loosely based on early medieval sky maps, so-called celestial maps. So it's medieval cartography. Mostly of those maps at the time and diagrams were based on incorrect theories. And but they were drawn very, very convincingly. So even the presence of decorative parts, which is animals, botanicals, the mythical creatures on these charts, they look very convincing. So people perceived all this as part of natural world. Mm-hmm. So here in my pieces, I also create my own landscape. Probably it's an utopian landscape. It's not real, it's constructed. And I call them, the working title is simulation facilities. So as I mentioned before, the way I do constructed photography, I stage the objects. Mostly of them are broken sculpture pieces, old wire structures, anything from the studio, which we call studio artifacts. So I stage them in special dark box, and I do photos. Then I print them, then I deconstruct them, and I create collage, and I finish collage with drawing. I do pencil, pastel, whatever, gouache, or anything. Those boxes, which I mentioned before, they also serve as my personal model of the universe in this constant formation, where handmade metamorphosis should create a compelling and also very convincing scenery. So it's about precision. It's about to convince somebody in this kind of absurd image that this is a scientific image. Again, it was based on my from very early childhood interest in astronomy, in medieval maps, in diagrams and charts. My father was a set designer for the movies, and in 50s he studied in Academy of Cinema in Moscow, and one of his teachers were Dziga Vertov, the incredibly, it's fantastic. It was a fantastic documentalist who did the cinema called Man with the Camera. In mid 60s, I don't remember that, but I saw the movie many times. My father has to create the moon for the movie, for the kids movie called Magic Rock. It's a Soviet movie which became very popular. And he was creating a huge pavilion in city, I forgot where it was, probably in Moscow. He created this moon out of very simple materials. Soviet Union never been like a Hollywood. They didn't have enough budget for that. So out of very simple materials, out of cardboard, whatever wood, he created this moon. And I knew this moon, I knew this movie from very childhood. So basically what I'm doing now, I also create, I'm creating this scene which mostly it's about science, but it's also about game, it's about magic, it's about my own, I don't know, my own ideas. It's hard, I mean, it's hard to explain. I'm kind of, it's it's something which I can't realize in 3 dimensions in sculpture, but I could do that in constructed photography, in collage. And what I said recently to my student, one of my students, it's a private classes, about the VR, virtual reality. It's an art which people trying to create the art for 21st century. And I just try to tell them that for me, for a lot of artists, it's more like entertainment. It's more like very technical thing. But on the side, we have this enormous source of imagery on internet. Of course, we have to filter this imagery. It's so much, it's almost chaos of it. But we have to filter, and we have to really appreciate that we have ability to see incredible amount of scientific illustration from very early stages till now. And so I'm very pleased to be part of this show. Thank you so much.
And I appreciate photography. I literally grew up being surrounded by old style photography in my house in Cuba. My father and my mother in the 50s took a trip to their famous trip to Europe on the Queen Elizabeth II. And my father took several suitcases full of photographic and filming equipment and filters and all kinds of things. And my mother was the model and he was the artist, although he was a businessman in real life. And so I grew up with a house full of this stuff. And I can see how you make whatever you have, you create out of whatever you have around you, particularly growing up in Cuba in the 60s. So I understand that feeling. That's what artists do. They see the world, they notice more than the rest of us, and then they make it more visible to the rest of us. So the invisible becomes visible, whether it be through holograms or it be through a very detailed type of technique. And you've been so great at bringing this enormous talent and sharing it with us today. I don't know, I didn't want to stop anybody because everything you were saying were all like, such wonderful, nuggets of wisdom. So I thought that was very important. Any questions out there today as we go?
Thank you.
Anyone out there today would like to have some questions or anything else you would like to say?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Susan,
Okay,
yes.
so I have a question for Yulia, and it's really more of a question, but I never knew about the precisionism movement that she mentions in the catalog essay. That was a kind of genre of work shown at, I believe she says, the Museum of Modern Art. That was new to me. And I wonder if she could say a bit more about it and how it relates to this wonderful exhibition.
A great question, Susan. It may not relate to the exhibit per se, but because I'm an art historian and I do care about avant-garde, right? I'm from Russia. Avant-garde artists have been on my mind for almost all my life. So I thought that it's interesting connection between the days of early MoMA, Alfred Barr, right, and him creating this sort of movement or category, right, because he was known for categorization of art. So that was a category of precisionists, of early American artists, and early modernism in America. Yeah, it's publicly available knowledge.
I'm fascinated with the idea, Michael, Susan, and Aga, your work. And this gets away from the precision thing, so please excuse me, but the idea of, how you know, how do you illustrate things that only exist in concept, in theory? And I think when you look at these glass plates for the hologram, I had a lot of experience. It's my privilege to be the person who handles all this work. So I get to engage with it on an extremely intimate basis. And I'm fascinated with the response to the holograms. What am I looking at? What is it? What was the perfect point of view from which to view these? And I was trying to explain to some people, well, wherever you happen to be is the ideal place to look at these. And sometimes you really have to like come in like really close to this until you realize, and it's like, oh my goodness, yes, of course. And it's fascinating that it's absolutely real. And it is, well, that's a shadow. And that you're looking at the bottle from the floor and the pills that are sitting on it. It's three-dimensional, it's absolutely beautiful, yet it's incredibly abstract. And I think the analogy with Aga, with your work, is you're intentionally creating these fictional environments, yet from a scientific point of view, it's like, I want to go out there and find the application where this is an absolutely perfect illustration. And I think the late physician Leonard Schlein, in his book Art and Physics, he actually explored these concepts where sometimes the art is happening in a totally different area and the science is going on in a different area, and they're happening at the same time, yet one seems to be an absolutely perfect explanation for the other, even though it's abstract and conceptual in nature. So I guess my question would be then, and I'd like to hear, everybody kind of pipe in with this. Where is the importance of that intersection where interpretation comes to play in your work, but also within the audience itself, your viewers? How much do you give? How much do you withhold when you're creating these things or you're exploring these very precise ideas?
Is anyone going to answer?
Sure. I'll give it a stab. I think that from my perspective in the work that I do, and I know Wendy and Patricia and others, you really look at who the audience, the creation is for, the animation, the still images, whatever. And you always have to remember that you're trying to teach something. And what we try and do is really sort of boil it down to the simplest elements. And once we've done that, and we've created the elements that really are vital in telling the story, we eliminate a lot of the stuff surrounding it that isn't as important, and we really focus on what is important. We can leave the stuff that isn't important, but through value and tone and color, we can make it sort of recede into the background. So obviously, if we're illustrating or creating animations for elementary school students versus surgeons that are that need to deal with how to do a surgical procedure, we're going to either include or eliminate certain things. Certain things can get very complicated when you're dealing with charts or the flow diagrams that show mechanisms of action and things like that. So it is a very, very fine line between showing something that is absolutely accurate and something that gets the message across, gets the story across. So that's always the fine balance between being scientifically accurate, yet being artistically, making it artistically conveyable.
I think interpretive is a very good description of much of it. I mean, you've got to interpret it because it's not clear to everybody what the most important message is.
With my work, I'm not a scientific illustrator, so I feel like I'm sort of in a different category a little bit, but I know with my work, when I'm making these drawings, I'm always focusing on plants that are considered to be weeds and undesirable. I work from a lot of photographs that I take for my reference, but when I need to look at more, I often find the only place I can find anything else on these plants, which I think are such beautiful plants, are extermination sites, you know, places, the sites where they're categorized as weeds and people are trying to get rid of them. And but it sort of makes me feel even more driven to try to make these drawings beautiful, to invite people in to recognize the value and the beauty of these plants that I guess are kind of like the mutts of the plant world. So just in terms of making this work and who your audience is, I mean, I'm doing this sort of like, it's like adjacent to what a lot of you do. I so admire your craft in this, but I just feel like my inspiration is to help people step close and see these plants and slow down and not step over them or dig them up and throw them out, but just kind of recognize the exquisite in the mundane and everyday plants that are out there, and kind of the wonder in even the most modest of plants. Oh, I'm going to mute myself now. Thank you.
I'd just say there's also an element of interpretation maybe in science when you think about experimental design and the phenomenon that you want to track and identifying the variable that you want to track to simplify what is very complicated and might have a lot of moving parts that we can't fully understand, but we can understand how two neurons interact, if not how the whole brain interacts. And I feel like I can completely relate to that in my own process of taking in a lot of information and then trying to make sense of it for an intended audience is often a process of interpretation or simplification and having to edit out things that were great delights to uncover, but ultimately clutter up the story that I'm trying to tell. And so I think you really hit the nail on the head when thinking about how does interpretation fit in.
Well, Anne, you're interpreting this very complex organizational structure of an ant colony by using the metaphor of two sisters talking on the phone or something. Is, I think, the idea of just simplifying that in a very human way was extraordinary, absolutely brilliant. It's a sweet video if you haven't seen it.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, my name's Dwight Bachman. I'm not an artist, okay, at all. But I'm writing a story on this session, and I've been at this university more than 30 years, 31 years come June 1, and I don't think I've ever enjoyed a session more than I've enjoyed this one. And I'm dead serious about it. Number one, I don't understand everything, but it's just so fascinating to me. A lot of it has to do, and Carmen Cid knows, my late son was a scientist, a biologist, and so what you guys are saying, I mean, he would eat this up because he taught biology, physics, and chemistry. They even asked him to teach environmental earth science, which he didn't know anything about, but I sent him the link from Eastern's environmental earth science department, and he taught that to high school kids down in Florida. And you guys just really touched my heart with this information. Just a quick question in terms of writing the story. Yulia, do you have everybody's email address here? Because what I'd like to and this, I think, just thinking about it just now, the most efficient thing for me to do, in addition, I gotta come, I haven't been on campus since last March, okay? So I gotta come in and get that, the catalog and see the exhibit, but it would be nice to have from everybody, if you could send Yulia, not more than 2 or 3 sentences, what you try to do with your work, so I could include it in the article. Because I think that'd be an efficient way to get something, especially from England. I mean, this is too cool. From all over, and I'd like to do that if I could, but Yulia, I've got to come in and see the exhibit.
Anytime, Dwight, and I can drop the catalogs to you since you are close by, but please do come.
Yeah.
Dwight, I'd be happy to give you a personal tour of the exhibit. It's wonderful, fascinating exhibit for us.
No, this is it overwhelms me, man, you know, at the exploration. I mean, it's just.
And it's fun.
Yeah. My son just loved discovery. From the time he was a little kid, you know, you're talking about leaves and stuff, he'd be out in the, we found a garter snake in our front yard. The garter snake couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 inches long, but he had a frog in its mouth. Dad, come here, look. So he picks up the snake and he pets it. And he said, you gotta let go of this frog. You know, we dissect frogs, man. He said they dissect frogs, Dad. It's just that kind of stuff, you know, but he taught biology. And so I want to do a nice job with this, Yulia and Carmen. But you guys, all of you are just really, really great. Fascinating. I haven't enjoyed a session in all my time here, Carmen, as much as I've enjoyed this one.
Thanks.
Well, there was so much a wealth of information here. I was taking notes and it was sort of like, you know, because I want to remember what you say. So as like I said, I'm doing a book and it's all about, you know, looking and being able to notice things and teaching people how to notice. And so that I was really like learning. It was a class for me. So I appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
You mentioned you mentioned books. There's a lady in Farmington. Her husband was my late son's doctor, but she's written children's books. She said, "Why we got to do a book on Siam?" I said, "I don't know any child illustrators or any book illustrators." I mean, lo and behold, I'm sitting up here looking at 5 or 6 of them. So yes. It's amazing.
Yes. No, thank you. You were amazing. I mean, it was clear from the catalog that you were unique people, but it's nice to hear it directly, though. So.
Oh, I mean that. I'm not joking. I'm not trying to stroke anybody. This is deep for me, anyway.
Well, thank you so much. It was very enjoyable, and we'll do more of this. We'll do other exhibitions that will build on this experience, great experience, and we'll explore more subjects and connections between arts and sciences. So that's my promise.
Well,
to you
good
all.
thing to come. Many good things to come. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
All right.
Don't forget to drop Yulia a line or two now.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have your addresses, so please do that.
Yeah, and I will drop the catalogs to you, Dwight.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
It's a great session, man.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark, for
Dr. Cid.
giving this
Delightful
idea
as
to us.
always.
All right.
Folks, take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye,
Take care, Aga. Thank you very
so
much.
so much. No, it was cool. It was great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Mm. Oh, Mark, fantastic. Thank you. What a great idea.
Wonderful. I'm glad it worked out well.
Oh,